Eventually when we as parents or other family members, try to help our teen deal with stressors, deal with difficult situations in their lives, it just doesn't seem to work out the way we wanted or they wanted. Sometimes there's some tension, conflict, bad feelings, some defiance or even rebellion or opposition to what we recommend or what we've done. And we get frustrated that it just didn't turn out the way I thought. And I often tell parents that when you're intervening in a situation and you're going to have a conversation or an interaction with your teen, think about how you want it to turn out. How do you want this to end? And this may help us tune into something that we talk about in our CHIRP program. We call it Misguided Support. So it's often hard to recognize this until it becomes a problem for both the family member and the teen. The teen just doesn't take the helpful act the way that we intended it. And I found that out even as a helpful grandparent. Some of my suggestions or recommendations are regarded not real favorably at times, especially if it wasn't requested of me. If I decided to offer some opinion or suggestions or advice that was not solicited. I had an example of a teenage young man who had type 1 diabetes, and his parents, they were, when you're diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, the doctors and the nurses, everyone give you lots of advice about how important it is to get good glycemic control. So you want to get that A1C and keep it within the tight boundaries. And so the parents were, in this situation, got worried about those highs and lows in their son's blood glucose levels.
Did you remember
and as a result, they were constantly reminding him to check
today?
his meter. This actually was seen by Vince. The more that they did this, that they didn't have confidence in him, that they didn't trust his ability to manage his diabetes on his own. So probably he kind of felt kind of disregarded, discouraged, and resentful of this. This led to him basically kind of faking and lying about his blood glucose levels. Something that's hard to fake because your meter will record those for you, and so unless you delete those, then there's parents can check and so forth. But again, that constant checking on the part of the parents can lead to more resentment, more feelings of lack of confidence, and more rebellion. So he really wasn't. He was actually using a paper log at that time and would write them down, but some of these numbers were just fake, were just made up. So when his parents finally discovered that, reminded him to check even more, that even became more of a problem, and it spiraled out of control. Really important when we communicate about these difficult issues and these independence issues, to find ways to communicate in a way that doesn't lead to that resentment or that lack of confidence, that feeling that where you have to take charge. I think parenting, especially with adults and with teens and then young adults, is so much about how do we step back from exercising control? How do we let them make some of those mistakes that are so important for them to learn from? But on the other hand, Vince had to find out how to manage that himself as he was heading off to college the next year. So he was going to be on his own and managing that and doing that. So it's a little illustration here about what happens when we exercise too much control or too little control when we are trying to help or support our teen or young adult, especially. With too much support, often it can overwhelm the teen by feeling that there's too much information. The teen feels that parents believe they're incompetent, potentially. They may feel the parents believe they're not strong, they're not capable. And also in Vince's case, he felt nagged, felt bugged and harassed by parents, to do this and to do it just right. On the other hand, we can step back and give them too much independence, and that can lead to things like feeling overwhelmed with too much responsibility that they can't handle. We may need to partner at first on certain tasks or certain skills to help let go and help them begin to feel confident and more independent in doing that. And they can feel unsupported and even invalidated, as though what they're struggling with is not valued by you as a parent. and not important enough for you to give that time and attention to. So this whole thing about misguided support is whether we give too much or too little support and the ways in which we communicate it. So one of the things we try to do is get misguided support back on track. We want to hit that bullseye more often. It's a lot of wiggle room at especially the adolescent and young adult stage of life. So we're not going to succeed all the time, but hopefully we'll hit that 50% mark and be more accurate and correct in our support that we're providing. Keys to that are clear and open communication about the roles and expectations, negotiating and contracting for these roles and responsibilities. That's real important. Those conversations where, how can we help you with that? How can we work on that together? How much do you want me to do? Tell me when I'm sticking my nose in too much, and let's talk about that frequently so we can adjust that help and that support to the appropriate level. Often you have to have some kind of way to observe it or monitor how well it's working. I like little family meetings or parent-child meetings where they stop on a weekly basis and say, how's this working? Do we need to change this? And I found some families doing that really had more success than families that just tried to catch it on the fly, do it intentionally and have those get-togethers. And then lastly, flexibility in revising the plan and contract as needed. And we've talked about that with problem solving, with assertive behavior and so forth, that we need to have a plan B. We need to be flexible to negotiate changes. Often tasks that I, as a psychologist, would give families to do and work on between sessions, they come back and say, well, that didn't work out for this reason, or that didn't work out for that reason. And I say, great, we're learning something from it. You know, they come in feeling like they've failed or they haven't done the homework exercise as planned or it would have turned out well. And I say, no, we're learning, okay? Each time we do something that doesn't work out quite the way we intended, we're learning something from that. And that gives us information for retooling and coming up with a plan B, plan C, and so forth. How do we do these things? Well, talk. There's not too many other ways to do this with regards to communicating and negotiating these kinds of changes that will lead towards our young people feeling more independent, more confident, more resilient on their own. And for us as parents, taking care of our, and adults, taking care of ourselves so we feel nurtured and taken care of and more resilient. So it's normal to run into problems with communicating with each other, especially when the teen becomes more independent from the family. I know when that age where they're not home a lot, they're at school, they're at after-school activities, and they're going to take off to their friend's house or do things on the weekend. So there's fewer opportunities to discuss and communicate and negotiate that, but that's the challenge. A lot of those things get in the way of good communication. And also our kids are getting exposed to the larger world, and they may meet friends, families, teachers, other people who have a different worldview on certain things. And those are things we need to be able to communicate with them about and navigate. So the goal of this really is to help us understand each other better, communicate better by getting everyone to speak the same language, teaching some helpful communication skills. Okay, we're going to finish up with what we call the general principles of positive communication. This comes up from a lot of really good work with parents and adolescents in family communication. But we're going to talk about 4 general principles, and I'll try to break them down for you a little bit. One is active listening. Another is emotional congruity. In other words, what we say and the emotion that we're expressing when we say it are congruent, not confusing. Nonverbal communication, so the things we say with our body language, with our posture, with our tone of voice, etc., that communicate probably more than the words that we're speaking. And lastly, kind of summarizing so that we repeat something and let the other person know we understood them, where we feel understood because they can summarize what we've shared with them, and then kind of thanking each other for the conversation. I often say, this is tough for parents, but and teens too, that you don't have to resolve the problem in that moment. Matter of fact, the worst situation is to try and gunny sack somebody or ambush them with a big decision to make, a big question to answer right now. I've got to know tonight. I've got to know before the weekend, and it's Friday. Okay, that really is an unfair position, and really can lead and should lead to probably a negative answer, just because it was done more of an ambush to try to get the answer that they wanted. So I think it's so important to say, let's continue this tomorrow, or you need to bring something like this up to me earlier in the week. I can't make a decision based on a few hours notice. So important again to communicate those things, and to say we can talk about it again. We can make another time for tomorrow night after dinner to sit and talk about this, and I can learn more about the situations beforehand, so I can make it a reasonable decision. So start with active listening. This is the listener providing an opener to the conversation. So tell me what happened, for example, would be a phrase. You seem really upset. What's going on? It also involves asking questions for clarification or details, but listening quietly, rephrasing what was said at times, and then commenting on the feelings. So active listening really lets the listener know you're ready to hear them out without interruption or judgment. And again, that listening part is so important. You really got to be listening and not thinking ahead to try to come up with an answer even before you've heard the whole expression. The next one is emotional congruity. So when we're trying to communicate effectively with others, it's important we stay calm, show concern and acceptance, avoid absolutes, extremes, kind of ultimatums in our communication, and to show empathy. Try to feel what the other person is feeling and see it from their perspective. And that's really hard sometimes, I think, with parents when dealing with adolescent issues. During adolescence, everything seems to be important. Everything seems to be the be-all and end-all experience. And I think one of the things that most teens will say is that everybody's going to be there if I miss this. So those are strong emotional states that they are in. They feel and believe those things at those times. So it's important to have empathy. Although, again, we have to be firm about those boundaries we talked about before in terms of saying, I understand, I feel bad about that, but I ask you to let me know by Tuesday, and here it is, Thursday night, and you want me to approve this for Friday. And I can't do that in that amount of time. I need to check with some other parents. I need to see who's going to be there, etc. But again, not getting angry or putting a lot of emotion into it, being willing to listen, but also to set those boundaries. Nonverbal communication is what we do, how we act, is as important as what we say, the content of what we say. And so when talking or listening, we have to be sure to look at the other person in the eyes, show interest and nod occasionally, acknowledge that you're listening and that you're taking in what they're saying, but avoid body language that conveys rejection or displeasure. Crossing your arms, pacing around the room, getting angry, shaking your head, balling up your fist, rolling your eyes. Those are all things that can shut down the conversation right away. So often, we have all been in an experience where we have a conversation with somebody, and the first thing we notice is just how they react. They look away, they avert that eye contact, and that immediately says, I'm not ready to listen. I'm not ready to take in what you have to say and regard it. So we have to be real aware of those nonverbal communication aspects of the situation. And then that summary and thank you. And as I mentioned a minute ago, that when you're wrapping up your conversation, end by summarizing what you understood. Here's what I heard you say, and I think that you were upset about, or that you're asking me to do, requesting of me. Is that right? And if it misses the mark, listen again. and then try to feedback that again. Again, sometimes it may not be what they exactly want to hear, but because it may be something that's not acceptable, but nonetheless, in that conversation, it's so important to make them feel appreciated and thank them for that conversation. There's a lot of meat in this material, a lot of trying to understand how these communication skills work, how important they are to working out these issues, this conflict. Again, we're going back to our developing and building resilience skills, and these skills in communication become so critical in the important relationships in our lives.